How do you feel about scoring luxury hotels for half the points most people pay? Or finding insane redemption deals that everyone else overlooks? Well, today's guest, Deanna Keane, also known as at the Points Fly Girl, did just that on her trip to Norway, leveraging the Citi 1 to 2 transfer to Choice Hotels, and she's here to spill all the details. But that's not all. Deanna's practically an honorary local in Ireland, thanks to her husband, and she knows all the hidden gems beyond Dublin, including the best ways to fly there on points and miles. And if Iceland is on your bucket list, you're in for a treat. Deanna has returned from her third trip to Iceland, where she used Dublin as a stopover and pieced together a strategy to make one of the most expensive travel destinations surprisingly affordable using points. From unlocking underrated hotel redemptions to mastering the best flight routes and positioning tricks, this episode is packed with actionable travel tips. So stick around, because by the end of this conversation, you'll never look at choice hotels, Ireland travel, or Icelandic trip planning the same way again. Welcome to the Revolutionizing Your Journey podcast. I am your host, DeAndre Coke. Today, I've got an excellent guest for all of you. We've got Deanna. Her handle is at the Points Fly Girl. She was recommended to us by Betsy of At Her Alaska Travels. That was back in episode 59. Super popular episode for anyone that wants to learn about Alaska Airlines, Alaska Miles, and growing up Alaskan. But today, we're here to focus on Deanna. And so, Deanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely, Deanna. So before we get into the main topics I want to cover, as always, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself. So where are you currently? What do you do for a living? What's your background? And how'd you get into the world of points and miles?
So right now I live in Las Vegas. I say right now like I'm moving, but I'm going to be here for quite a while because I do have a full-time job that I will not be leaving anytime soon. I am a full-time attorney, criminal defense, public defender specifically in Las Vegas, Nevada, a job that I do love. So I'll be there for a while. It is a very good job. We have the best office in the world, but I also love points and miles. And a lot of that is because I love traveling. I have come to love the strategy of learning points and miles and redeeming them. I've shared with other people that one of my joys with it is because it's almost like a giant strategy game with real life prizes. So I think I've just come to love, the giant strategy of it, learning the rules, even when the rules change, right? It's all part of it. So I do really like that. I've been in Las Vegas since I was maybe 14. So I've been here quite a while. Went to college here, law school, ended up finding a job here. Even though many times I said I was going to move, I did not. And it worked out in my favor. So, like I said, we have the best office in the country, at least. So I'm very happy to be there. Practicing law is definitely something different than points and miles, but I think a lot of the strategy is kind of what we use as well. So that learning strategy, knowing strategy is something that I enjoy, but also it gets a lot. It's very overwhelming and it is nice to have something else to turn my focus to. So which is why I kind of started content creation. But I did get into points and miles because I love travel, like most of us. And I started with the Chase Sapphire Reserve many years ago after a friend recommended it to me, which I only got because he and I did a trip to New Zealand and Australia, and our flights were getting delayed, and we got into the lounge with his card. I was like, oh, this is really cool. Maybe this is actually worth the crazy fee, right? Before I even knew what they were worth. And so I started redeeming my points through the portal when I would find a good deal. And I honestly thought that I was killing the game because I was, booking these great flights through the portal. And as time went on, I knew when I met other people, because there is actually somebody in Las Vegas who has a lot of mutual friends because he was former lawyer who has a business that he just handles everybody's points and miles. Basically, they sign up for him. He handles everything for them. And I knew, and I had friends who knew him, used him, and they were flying business class. And I was just like, wait, how are you guys doing this? This is totally like mind blowing. And the thought and idea of it seemed overwhelming. But then when COVID came around, I found myself with a lot of free time, and I found myself basically killing too much time. I felt like I was wasting too much time online. And I thought to myself, I need to find something to do. I need to find something to focus on, to learn. And I ended up finding some websites that talked about, the strategy as I know it now, like the intent, getting into points and miles. And I just started learning, and I found it so fascinating, and I couldn't get enough of it. I was just every day trying to learn something new, trying to figure out what the new strategies were, learning about transfer bonuses, the fact that getting more cards isn't going to tank my credit, which honestly, I didn't even believe at first. I just was kind of like, okay, let me take a risk here. I already have my house, I have a car. I'll take the risk that my credit's going to get a hit. But as I learned, they were right. My credit didn't tank and even got better in some situations, but I digress a little bit. But that's kind of how I got into it. I do love to travel. I did eventually, so right before COVID, a bit before COVID, I had met my husband, who was living in Ireland at the time. He is Irish. And we had a long distance relationship from Las Vegas to Ireland, just outside Dublin. So our dates were just really traveling around the world together. And the points obviously helped me with that. And then learning the strategy with that was very good. I was flying economy at the time. I didn't really know the strategy as much. But right after we got married, that's when COVID hit. And I started learning more and more. And then that definitely helped us. And now, we've upped our game to the point that we are flying international business class multiple times a year, as many times as my PTO will let me at least, and covering most, if not all of our hotels on our trips. So it's really been amazing for us.
That's absolutely incredible. And there's a few things you said there that I want to come back to before we get into the meat and potatoes of the conversation. So, A, public defender in Las Vegas, of all places, has to be absolutely wild. And at the same time, I need to get your phone number because my bachelor party is going to be there in a couple months and I just might need someone to save us. So, but I'm sure we don't have the time for it on this show, but I'm sure you have some pretty crazy stories. I'm just thinking of all places in the world or the country to be a public defender, what would probably be one of the most interesting. And I imagine it's definitely Vegas.
Yeah, it's definitely never a dull moment. Every day is a new adventure, I would say. There's a lot to learn. There's just a lot in Vegas, to keep it short. But it is what it is, right? And we just kind of figure it out as we go along. And being a criminal defense attorney is never going to be boring anyway. But yeah, like you said, in Vegas, it also has its own challenges and interests. So yeah, it is an interesting job.
And so one of the things I do want to make sure to highlight that you did bring up, because we have all the time new listeners to the show that are newer to Points and Miles that may have the same apprehension that you had, specifically around the impact to your credit score when having a strategy of opening and adding more cards. And you still went ahead and said, hey, this is probably not true, but I'm going to do it anyway. I already have the house. What could I lose by doing this? Right. But there's so many people that they still don't believe, and they maybe they are in the process still. They haven't gotten their house here. They want the next house or the car, whatever it may be. But I love the fact that you said that, because in our guide online, our comprehensive kind of points guide, I put my credit score on there every single year for people to see. And I've been doing this for many years, and I think I have north of 15 cards open for between business and personal. And I just checked actually yesterday, it was 844, right? So as long as you're being financially responsible, having access to the credit does not diminish your score in itself. So I love the fact that you pointed that out. And so what I'd like to do is transition, because when we were talking prior to coming on the show, I know you mentioned about your husband being Irish and having some expertise there. So I do want to make sure to cover kind of 2 to 3 different topics on the show today from a deep dive standpoint. So one is going to be definitely unpacking some travel expertise around Ireland, because I think that's a destination that a lot of people are interested to go to, and kind of finding the tips and tricks on how to do it, especially with points, would be amazing. I know that you've also been to Iceland a few times, and Iceland's one of my favorite countries. I think it's an amazing and beautiful country, so I want us to get a chance to talk through that. But before we go through all that, you have a little bit more of an expertise or niche than what I've seen with a brand of hotels that you almost never hear anyone talk about, which is Choice Hotels. and specifically the fact that Citi ThankYou points transfers 1 to 2 to Choice. Now, most people are probably like, I haven't heard of Choice Hotels, or how come Choice Hotels isn't talked about that much? Well, there's, especially here in the States, it's kind of like with IHG being known for their Holiday Inn brands. Choice isn't really known for the luxury side of things, but I'm sure there's some really good redemptions out there.
Yeah, exactly. So I came across it really when I was planning my trip to Norway. Whenever I plan my trips, I try to do things manually as much as I can and not use as many sites, because there's a lot of things you can find, right, without when you search on your own, and rather than searching the aggregator sites. So what I'll usually do is I just go down the list of any points that I have, right? I have a transfer chart, and whichever points I have, what, transfers to them, hotels, airlines, all of it. And when I was looking at the list, and it's my own list that I made, right, for people who follow me and want it, I saw that it was a 1 to 2 transfer. And I said, wait, let me check this. I think I might have done this wrong. And it was. I actually went, and I went on like 2 or 3 different sites to make sure it wasn't incorrect. And so then I thought when I went on Choice that it was also going to be, extremely high, similar to how Hilton, their points levels are high, right? Amex transfers at 1 to 2, but their points are a lot higher. With Choice, I found that that wasn't the case. There was actually a few really nice hotels, and they have I guess I want to say offshoot. I don't think that's the right word, but basically preferred hotels, which is part of Choice. And preferred has their luxury hotels. So it used to be somewhat separate, but I was actually just, the website has been changing in the last year since I planned this trip. And you can actually pull the preferred hotels on Choice Hotels for the most part. And so they have preferred hotels and Choice hotels, and you can use the points for both. I don't know if that's changing now, though, because preferred hotels now also partners with Citi. That happened after I booked this trip, and that transfers at a 1 to 4 ratio to preferred hotels directly. Now, preferred hotels has a little bit of a different point scheme, and I planned on having a lot more information for you today, but their website was not working today. I was trying to look it up so I could look on at other redemptions, but I know that there are some through preferred hotels, although the points are separate. So I would recommend definitely looking at both of those, Choice and preferred. But what I found was I found some really great hotels in Oslo, specifically, is where I started, that were around $400 a night, going for 20,000 points per night, which sounds normal. But then also when you take into consideration that 1 to 2 transfer ratio. So that means a $400 a night hotel, a little bit more than that actually, ended up being 10,000 points per night once I transferred over my Citi points, because I doubled those points. And I honestly didn't even believe that it was real, because before I used to be a little bit more points, and it actually ended up transferring over too many points because I thought it was going to cost more. So I only needed 60,000 points for a 3-night stay in Oslo to stay at this hotel called The Thief that goes for $400 a night. And I did actually look up what it would cost to go in August of this year, because that's when I went last year. So it would be, for 3 nights, it's $1,291. So that actually ended up giving me a 4.3 set per point value. So that's huge value that I got of that. And I will say that I love the hotel. It was a great hotel, really nice. It is part of their preferred hotel, so it is considered a luxury hotel, perfectly situated. Everything about it was amazing. So I was really happy with our stay. And there are a few other options there too. There's another hotel that I don't think I'm saying the name right, but it's called something similar to like Americanogen. And it also $400 plus a night and goes for 20,000 points. Now, other points do transfer to Choice, but they transfer at a 1 to 1 ratio. So maybe it could be worth it, right, in somebody's certain circumstance, because that's still not bad. But obviously, you're going to get way more value out of your Citi points. And I had a few Citi points because I had applied for the card. And honestly, I was sitting on them for about a year trying to figure out how to use them wisely. So I was really happy I didn't use them earlier and was able to transfer them over and use them. And like I said, I ended up transferring a little bit too many points. So we ended up actually using them in Iceland, Norway as well, which is up in the north. So that hotel wasn't as luxurious, but it was still definitely had its charm. It was cute, had a great view. and we were able to book that one for 12,000 points per night. And I looked up, that hotel now goes for about 263 a night. When we booked it, I think it was about 190 a night, but now it's about 263 a night when I looked it up. But it's still going for 12,000 points per night. So city points, that's only 6,000 points that you would need per night to stay at that hotel. And there's a couple options there too, which are great options. Again, very well located and nice, great staff. We got free breakfast at that one. So, and it was one of those buffet styles that I ate too much at. The value was definitely there and I was super happy about it. But I know when I first found it, I was able to play around a little bit. And there are some great hotels around the world. I would say in the US, it was not really much to write home about, right? Like you said before, it has kind of, the unexciting redemptions, which I think do work well for a lot of people. So if you're not looking for super luxury in the US, I would definitely take a look at it. And quite honestly, always look at all of them because they're all always changing and they'll add new ones. And you just never know when you're going to find something great that wasn't part of the collection even a few months ago. But their preferred hotels have some really, really great stuff. I remember looking at one hotel that made me want to book a trip back to South Africa because it was preferred hotel that was in the vineyards in Cape Town. I can't remember how many points it was. I was hoping to find that today. I did not. But I remember it was a really good value though. And that was something that you could book with the preferred hotels, and has some really nice hotels around the world. I saw a lot of stuff in Europe when I was looking. I saw Spain. I did see some in Ireland. And there's definitely some out there. So especially if you're sitting on some city points, I would highly recommend you take a look at Choice, especially if you're traveling abroad.
And so, with that in mind, I know there are some parts of the world that you go and they don't have the Hiltons, they don't have the Marriotts or the Hyatts to stay. Where you stayed in Norway for this trip, these different locations that you did use the preferred hotels, did you happen to look and see if there were other options through other top name brands? I'm sure maybe the redemption wasn't as good if they were there, but were these hotels in areas that you really weren't finding many other options by chance?
So I did look at Hyatt. Hyatt is usually my first go-to because of that transfer from Chase, right? They have the Chase one-to-one transfer, but they're usually very good value. And I did not find any Hyatts in Oslo at the time, and there were definitely not any in Alisund. I did end up booking a small luxury hotel, which was part of Hyatt at the time in Bergen. And we were able to stay at a really nice hotel in Bergen. But now I'm not even sure if there's any Hyatts in Bergen anymore, but I would have to recheck. Right. Well, actually, wait, they have the Mr. and Miss Smith. So that was kind of there. And there was a Mr. and Miss Smith in Alisund, but it was a lot more points. So I definitely found a lot more value with the Choice, especially because, like I said, I had transferred over too many points. So I had some left over that I wanted to use. So if I remember correctly, though, there weren't any Hyatt there. And I remember we were doing a challenge to try to get Globalist and do 20 nights at the time. So I'm almost positive if there would have been a Hyatt, I would have booked it. But I remember not finding it. So I don't think it was just like a better value thing. I think there just wasn't actually any Hyatts.
Got it. And one of the things that was interesting is that you had signed up for the Citi card. And actually, I'd mentioned this in one of our quick hits earlier this year about how I felt like the Citi Strata Premier card is underrated. I actually got it myself in January, and I should be hitting the sign up bonus for it very soon, which I think is about 75,000 Citi ThankYou points. But this is what happens when you start building up a bank of points in different places, and it gives you opportunity to find things that maybe you wouldn't normally, right? Everyone that's got the Marriott or has the Hilton points, or they've got the Chase and Amex, they're going for either Amex to Hilton or Chase to Hyatt. By having some of these a little bit more obscure points, you give yourself more options in the world of redemptions to find a place that maybe not as frequently traveled, especially in the points and miles community. So the availability might be there a lot more as well, because not many people know that this sweet spot exists, which is really interesting. So Deanna, my question, are you still trying to keep up with your Citi ThankYou points? I mean, obviously most of us, we weigh very heavily on either Capital One or Chase or Amex. do you still find yourself using the Citi, I'm assuming it's the Strata Premier card or one of their Citi cards to gain the thank you points and keep building that base up by chance?
So a little bit, because I did find such great value with those choice points. And I know I'm going to run into this situation again, because when I was able to look at the preferred hotels, they had really, really great portfolios. So I'm very excited to stay in one of those hotels again. But yeah, like you said, I think the Citi is a bit underrated. I think it's especially underrated as an everyday card. I think Citi, you can't hit as much the sign up bonuses. And I think that that's why people kind of go towards Chase and Amex, me included, because, you can kind of work those welcome offers. But for the people who are looking for a good everyday card to, get multipliers, the Citi is incredibly underrated, because you've got 3 times on air travel, hotels, restaurants, supermarkets, and gas. I mean, that's where what we're spending 90% of our money, right? Like, I don't know if there's any other single card that has that portfolio of earning, anything over 1 times point. Maybe you could equivocate that to one of the cards that's earning 2 times on everything. I think that that could be about equal. But especially because I know, especially now, right, there's people who spend a lot of money on gas or going out to eat, and that you can really get a lot of multipliers there. And I don't know if I mentioned EV charging. I saw that that's added on there too. EV charging 3 times points. Is there any other card that offers multiplier on EV charging?
There might be. If there is, it doesn't come to mind because it's not a staple that, at least that I have. I know on the Citi Strata Premier, like that is our card that we have hooked up to Instacart. So we use that card for groceries. And a lot of people say, oh, well, we use the Amex Gold card for groceries, which probably makes sense, right? Because it's the 4X versus 3X. However, we rack up Amex points so easily between our business spending. Amex keeps sending me offers for business platinum cards, right? With 250,000 sign up point welcome offer. So as you said, these Citi points are a lot harder to get. So it's going to take a lot more time to ramp these ones up. And so that's why we do use it as part of our everyday spending, especially in these categories that we find to be pretty useful as well. So absolutely love the fact that you've unpacked a little bit of a specific niche here in the world of Citi points, thank you points, and specifically this 1-to-2 transfer. I think a lot of listeners are going to hear this and say, oh, wow, I do have some Citi points. Maybe they heard our episode or when I had suggested, considering to get it back in January like I did myself. And they're like, oh, this is another place I can start looking for, which is awesome.
Yeah, I think that it's really great. And I would suggest people, who are looking into going somewhere, or maybe not even tied to going anywhere, just go on the preferred hotel site, and then you can narrow it down to country and just see what hotels are around, because there are some really cool options. And if you go to the preferred hotel site directly, it is part of choice, but there's a preferred hotel website directly, and it'll let you look at the hotels, and has only the preferred luxury hotels, and you can see what you can get and how awesome they are, to the point that I'm honestly probably going to travel, like plan a trip around one of these really cool hotels that I was seeing. But I need to up my Citi points again now, because I burned them all anyway, which I don't regret. It was amazing. So I just need to get some more Citi points.
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this week's episode. DeAndre here, and I just wanted to interrupt briefly to remind you of 2 things. First, be sure to sign up for our newsletter, where we give you direct access to travel updates, news you'll want to jump on in the points and miles world, and our continuously updated card offers to maximize your travel rewards, often before they're ever mentioned in the show. Also, if you didn't already know, we have a private Facebook group where we share news as it breaks, ideas, and other things that don't make it into the newsletter or show many times. And that's the best place to get your points and miles question answered directly by me and other travel enthusiasts. Both of these links will be in the show notes. Now, back to the show. So, talking amazing travel experiences, let's segue that to Ireland. Right, you've been back and forth to Ireland a bunch of times, both solo and with your now husband. And so I want to start off first, before we get into points and routes and airlines and all those different things. what are some of your must-see places beyond Dublin that first-time visitors might overlook?
So I feel like one place that's overlooked a bit is the Dingle Peninsula. It's over on the West Coast and it is gorgeous. It's a great place to be and see. And honestly, I think it's one of the most beautiful places I've even been. Just driving around there, the cliffs, the beaches, the greenery, the views. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I think it's a bit overlooked because people know, right, like the Cliffs of Moher. And a second one I was going to say is Killarney, but I feel like Killarney is kind of well known for people, at least people who travel there. A lot of people do end up hitting Killarney, or we'll see it a lot in the blogs. But I think just people aren't talking about the Dingle Peninsula enough. And there's just a whole area of amazing and great places you can go to. The great thing about Ireland, though, is you can just keep on going, see so many amazing things there. Because I've lost track of how many times I've been there now. I want to say maybe 8 or 9, but it's still not boring. There's always something new to see, somewhere to go. I'm in a little bit of a different situation because we do have to go see family and spend time with family while we're there. So, it's not always just seeing something new every time we're there. But I think my husband actually gained a lot of appreciation for his country after meeting me because I dragged him to so many places that he wouldn't have gone to, didn't know were there, just didn't do. And on a similar note, I do want to mention something that probably everyone's heard of, that because I was like, there's no way I'm going to Blarney Castle. That's going to be a tourist trap. So I had avoided that. And we only went because there was a time when my mom and a good friend of mine came with us. And I thought we were driving back. It was on the way. Okay, let's go see Blarney Castle with them. And it was amazing. So sometimes I feel like it should be pointed out, sometimes the things that you hear about almost too much and think might be a tourist trap can actually be really, really great. And just because it's well known doesn't mean that it's not somewhere worth seeing. Because Blarney Castle, though, the grounds there are just, because it's not just the castle, it's, the whole grounds, and there's houses there, and or like the old houses that they had, giant, almost mansions, what we would call. And it was just, you could spend the whole day there. So definitely set aside some time and go to Blarney Castle if you're in the area. I think that it was really great. It's definitely worth driving around and seeing outside of Dublin, because Dublin's just, it's going to be the city. It is cool. It's got a lot of places to eat and drink and hang out. It is definitely worth seeing. If a lot of people are going to Ireland, aren't going just for Dublin. They're really going for like the nature and to see all that, and some hiking or bike riding. There's a ton of nature and beauty to be seen over on the West Coast.
I love that. And I'm glad that you actually mentioned that because I have not been to Ireland myself, but I've also just felt like everyone I know that goes to Ireland goes to Blarney Castle, the Blarney Stone, all the different things. Like, that seems a little bit overrated. Let me go the path less traveled. But I really appreciate that you actually said that, because now it will be on the radar to actually go and experience. Because as you said, there are places that, yes, they could be absolutely crowded, very popular, but they're still worth actually getting a chance to see. And if you can time it right, maybe you just get there very early, avoid the crowds. I'm sure there's different ways to strategize the approach in getting there.
Yeah, for sure. And then somewhere like that, the castle grounds are actually so huge that I don't even think you have to worry about crowds, really. I don't know if we just lucked out, but it's so big and there's so much to see while you're there. I did not kiss the stone. That was not my thing, but everybody else did.
Yeah, I don't find myself doing that either. So, kindred spirits there. So, Deanna, question for you. So, you're in Vegas, right? When going to Ireland, are you typically positioning, or I believe there is now a direct flight from Vegas, I think it's to Paris. So, are you doing that and then positioning from there? Like, how are you guys typically making this trek from the Midwest of the United States over into Europe? What's been the sweet spots? I mean, obviously, when you think of airlines, the one that comes to mind is Aer Lingus. So I'm sure there's probably some strategies with Avios, British Airways, Amex points, but let us know, what have you found to be the sweet spot in getting to Ireland?
So there is actually the nonstop from Vegas to Paris, but the interesting thing is that it's seasonal and it's only, I think, in the winter or around the winter. It's only winter time that you can get that one. So I actually just flew that one for the first time back when we were coming back from Ireland this winter. And we did from Dublin to Paris to Vegas. But that was the first time I had flown that one. That's not usually the route that I take. The one that I usually find the best deals with points actually is KLM, because KLM has the nonstop from Vegas to Amsterdam. And I almost never need to reposition because I can find really great deals getting all the way to Dublin, and actually usually find worse deals just going to Amsterdam. I don't know if that route just became super popular or what. Oftentimes it'll be way more points to just go to Amsterdam than to like go all the way to Dublin. There's been a couple times we've just gone to Dublin to reposition, go see family for a couple of days and go somewhere else. So the funny thing is that I rarely needed to reposition for Ireland. I can just get there, find a deal on KLM. They've been really, really good for me on that. When I did reposition, I used British Airways because they have the nonstop from Vegas to London. And then from London, you can catch a really cheap flight over to Ireland. But I feel like British Airways, for me at least, it's really, really hard for me to find good redemptions on there. I will say one of the underutilized ways, I found a really good deal the opposite way, because I was flying my mother-in-law to Vegas and back. So I was booking her a round trip. I wanted to get her business class. And I actually ended up finding a really good deal in the portal, believe it or not. I found a good deal on points in the Amex portal. And one of the underutilized things with the Amex Business Platinum is that when you book business and first class, you get a 35% return on the points that you use for the redemption. So when I did all of that, I mean, it was so long ago, but I want to say it came out to like 110, maybe 120,000 points for the round trip, no repositioning, business class, Ireland to Vegas and back to Ireland. So that was a really good redemption that I found surprisingly in the portal. So that was a shocker. So definitely look at that too if you have that card, because that 35%, it doesn't always work out great, but it can come in really handy. And it was an easy flight for her because that was through British Airways. So it was Dublin to London and then London nonstop to Vegas and then the same route home. And then we do have Aer Lingus just started the nonstop from Vegas to Ireland just last year to Dublin. And I've been dying to get that one, but it's so hard to find good redemptions on the business class for that one. And whenever I have found it, it just hasn't worked with my schedule because I travel too much. That's kind of the problem too.
So speaking of Aer Lingus, for those of us that are not in, these major hubs, have you by chance been able to find where utilizing points transfers from Amex or Chase to British Airways, Avios, and then maybe those British Airways Avios transferring to Aer Lingus have made sense? Or is in general it pretty hard to find a good redemption with Aer Lingus specifically to Ireland? What's been your experience? And I'm sure you haven't had to search that too much because of course you're in Vegas, so you haven't really needed to, but I don't know if you've had other people that have asked you because they know you fly to Ireland often and you've been kind of looking for them. What's been your experience with that so far?
Well, I do kind of look just to kind of know and play around. I'm sure you do it too, right? We're kind of weirdos just to see what's out there.
Absolutely.
But you can find really good deals from the East Coast. I would say if you're on the East Coast and can reposition to New York or Boston, you can find some really good deals through Aer Lingus that will get you nonstop to Ireland, especially Boston. I'm always seeing deals out of Boston. Chicago's a good one too. There's a nonstop Chicago to Dublin. So I'll look at that one a bit because Chicago's a pretty quick flight for us and we have family there. So I would always, or we have actually friends, just really close friends that are like family. So it's funny I said that. But we do love Chicago. We go there. I'd have no problem repositioning there. So there are some good deals there, but I do find the really good deals to fly to Ireland, I'm usually finding out of Boston and New York. So those are good places to get to if you're over near there. If you're over on the West Coast, then I would recommend looking at Seattle and San Francisco. I see some pretty good deals out of there. LA has some good deals as well. But I do know there's a nonstop San Francisco to Dublin, and there might be one from Seattle as well. But I know that's probably where you're going to find the best deals.
Being in Virginia myself, where I am in Virginia specifically, having to position everywhere, getting to New York is basically just as easy as getting to Boston for me. So that's good to know that Boston is a great opportunity to position too, and maybe taking the Aer Lingus flight because that's an airline I have not flown before. So, Deanna, my next question for you is for those individuals that want to go to Ireland and stay there on points as well, by chance, are there any hotel programs that they should be focusing on? Now, we just spent time talking about choice hotels and preferred hotels and obviously Hyatt. Do you see that any of these hotels have more coverage or perhaps, are non-existent, whether it's between those brands or adding in Hilton and Marriott as well?
So there's a lot in Ireland. You'd be kind of surprised with such a small location that there's a lot of options with points. They have some Marriotts out there. One of the most famous hotels, the Shelburne, very expensive, very high redemption. But if you're trying to stay somewhere fancy or burn an 85,000 point certificate that you happen to have, then the Shelburne might be your place. But other than that, I'm not usually burning that many points because it is pretty compact and it's small and you can find pretty much everything. I've seen preferred hotels have their Hyatt has some there. I'm trying to remember. I know that there's like a Radisson there. I've stayed a couple times at the Hyatt Centric there, which I would highly recommend. It's a good redemption. It's a pretty new and modern hotel and it's perfectly situated. So I would highly recommend Hyatt Centric if you're going there and want a good redemption. But there's a little bit of everything, quite honestly. You're not going to find so many with points when you're going over to the West Coast and going to some of the smaller places. It's been a while since I've searched with points and like on the West Coast. The last couple times we've been there, we've just stayed in and around Dublin. But you might find yourself having to pay cash. But again, I haven't searched. You should always search. And even if you searched 2 months ago, search again because you never know what hotels pop up. But there's definitely a lot of options, especially when you're looking in the big cities like Dublin and Belfast. Belfast is over in Northern Ireland, which is a place that I think a lot of people want to go to and probably should. It's very, very nice. I like Belfast a lot too.
That's perfect. So I appreciate a little bit of that clarity. And so I wanted to, before we move on from the subject of Ireland, just ask you from a timing standpoint, what have you found is the best time to go? Because obviously the weather can be unpredictable. And do you recommend someone just renting a car and driving around, or is there another form of transportation to experience Ireland that you'd recommend instead?
So May to September is probably the best time to go. Winter is not as bad as you think it would be. And if you want to go in the winter, I would recommend going around Christmas because they're very much into the Christmas spirit there. So it is very nice and decorated. It is pretty nice to go. But weather-wise, I would highly recommend going in the summer. But May to September can be really good. Even sometimes you'll get better weather in September than you do in July. You just kind of never know. But be prepared for some rain. It's Ireland. It does rain a lot. We get lucky most of the time we go out there. We don't really hit too much rain. But I remember one summer we were there for a week and got absolutely beautiful weather. And then after we left, I think it rained for about 2 months straight every single day. So just understand if you're going to be somebody that's upset because it rains on your vacation, consider that. But other than that, for me, I mean, I'm from the desert. I have no problem if it rains on my vacation. I'm happy to see it. But the summer can be really, really beautiful there when you get a sunny day. I mean, it's gorgeous. The weather's perfect. Everybody's outside. It's really, really great place to be in the summer. I'd highly recommend going at that time. And as for transportation, yeah, driving, I think driving is probably the best way to go because especially when you're going like on the West Coast and things like that, you do have to be a bit braver than you are here because the roads are so small. Definitely get insurance there. If I remember correctly, I think most of the car insurances do not cover Ireland. There's a lot of places where there's a few countries aren't covered, so double check that. But if I remember correctly, Ireland is very commonly not covered. And it's probably because of the small roads. And there will be a tiny little road and then a brick wall next to it. So people are constantly getting their cars scratched up. So definitely look into that and consider that you're probably going to have to pay for car insurance while you're out there. But I would recommend driving. I think it's really beautiful if you're comfortable driving in the left side of the road and knowing that it's going to be very small. So you're going to be a little brave sometimes, then you'll be all right. But you can also travel a lot of places by train as well. You can get from Dublin to Belfast. I know for sure you can get to by train. I haven't looked at the train map too much because we're always driving, but if that's something you would prefer, I would definitely look at the map and then you can plan a whole trip around that because Europe is amazing with trains, right? And it's so awesome to be able to utilize.
Perfect. That was a great wrap up to making sure that we have our expectations set when getting to Ireland and experiencing it, right? Because, like you said, weather can literally rain on someone's parade. And so knowing that that could be happening is important. Being comfortable with driving on the left side of the road and understanding that's a really interesting fact on the car insurance piece. Because immediately I was thinking, yeah, well, obviously Chase has one of the best car insurances on their credit cards, but that's good advice to double check and make sure that Ireland itself is not excluded as well. So really appreciate that information around Ireland and travel. And it's really cool that you've been able to go there so many times with your family or with your husband. And so before we wrap this episode, I wanted to pivot. And I know you literally just got back from the Maldives, but we've talked about the Maldives a lot on this show. And so I want to pivot to one of your more recent trips, and that was that you went to Iceland, and I believe you actually used Dublin as a stopover. So I'm really curious, what was the point strategy for Iceland? When I went to Iceland, it was very, very hard to find a stay there on points as well because of just how spread out it is. So I'm really curious, what was your Iceland experience like?
So we decided to stay in Reykjavik. So that made it a bit easier. I know that there are definitely some hotels on points outside of Reykjavik, but we do really love Reykjavik as a town and we were going in the winter. So I didn't want to do anything too crazy. My goal was really to just go see the Northern Lights, hang out in the city. And I say city, but it's very small, probably more like a town, right? Reykjavik, but just kind of hang out, see the Northern Lights, do, a few little adventures because I do just love Iceland, love being out there. And my husband has no problem driving there. I always suggest that we get a tour, especially like in the winter. That kind of worries me. But he hates tours and he hates being dragged around. So he's always like, no, I'll drive. It'll be fine. So, and it's one of the places that is excluded. I remember we looked that up with our J Sapphire Preferred, renting a car. We wouldn't have known that if I didn't double check. So definitely always double check that because somewhere like Iceland where the weather can change in a heartbeat, right? Then you just definitely need to have some kind of insurance. And we did. So we ended up purchasing that. But we drove over to Kirkjubel Mountain. We spent a day driving over there, which was really awesome, but ran into a blizzard and I was terrified. So I couldn't even see anything. But anyways, part of the adventure, and I can't remember where I was going with this. Oh, so we decided to stay in Reykjavik. I had a couple 50,000 point nights with Marriott that I needed to burn. And the addition there actually had availability and it was just under 50,000 points, if I remember correctly. So I had 2 or 3 I was using. I can't remember if I used a couple of those. And then the addition was also a fine hotel and resort. So I booked one night with the fine hotel and resort. So got my $200 back on that. I believe it was pretty expensive. I think it was about $500 a night. So I did do that. But then I also booked another night because Chase was offering 20,000 points if you spent $500 on a hotel. And that was like around Christmas time. So then I ended up paying for another night and I got 20,000 points. So out of pocket, I remember out of pocket, we were about $800, but then I also got 20,000 points on top of that and then got the $200 back from the fine hotels and resorts. So, we just kind of worked it a little bit differently. That is definitely on the higher end. I think most people, if you don't have a 50,000 point certificate, would find it really worth it unless you found some great deal, right, with the fifth night free, which you can't do when you have those certificates. But I think if you have a lot of points that you're looking to burn, when you use the fifth night free, that is definitely a beautiful hotel that I would recommend in Reykjavik. I really liked it.
Yeah, when you go to Iceland, there's kind of three different ways to do Iceland. So you can do what you did, and I did for a couple of days, which is you park yourself in Reykjavik and then you do like excursions or trips within driving distance, which for the most part, you usually go an hour to maybe 2 hours outside the city, and then you have to still make that drive back. Now, you and I went two completely different times. I was there in August, which is the closest thing they have to summer. So the temperature had a high of like 65 in the day, and also that was where the sun set at 11:30 at night and rose at 4 in the morning. So very different. So never got to see the northern lights there. But that's one of the ways. Other half of my trip is where you kind of park in smaller hotels and do some trips from those smaller hotels that are all over the island. But I think the third way, which I think would be one of the coolest ways to experience Iceland, is renting a camper van and then just driving the island and sleeping in the camper van, which I'm 99.9% sure my fiance is like absolutely not about the camper van life. But I do think that would be one of the coolest ways to experience Iceland. And Iceland, for me, was one of the most beautiful countries I've seen, mostly because it was just different. It was like if Hawaii was in the north. So you've got these incredible waterfalls, hiking glaciers. I mean, it was an outdoor paradise for sure. And so I highly recommend, anyone taking the opportunity going to Iceland. It's such a beautiful country.
It is. It is. I love it so much. That was my third visit there. And when we were there, I kept on saying, well, when we come back, when we come back. It's definitely a place that a lot of travelers love who have been there and want to keep going. And a lot of people have asked me why. And I tell them similar to what you said. There's nowhere else like it. There's not a single place that you can see the things the way you see them in Iceland. I think there's a lot of places that are great and amazing and I love and I will go back to, but you can also see something similar in other countries. Like Ireland, for example, it's funny because it's a lot like New Zealand. And if you see a photo of New Zealand, you see a photo of Ireland, a lot of times you couldn't tell the difference, right? Which doesn't make it any less beautiful. It's great. But with Iceland, I think if you see a photo of Iceland, there's not a lot of other places you'd confuse it with.
Absolutely.
It's really a place on its own, and I absolutely love it. I love it in the summer. I think if I had to choose, I would probably do the summer, but it's also just an experience in its own in the winter. It's funny now that I've been twice in the winter, but that's just kind of how it happened, especially because there was just a really good redemption over to Ireland. And like you were saying, we use that as a stopping point. It's so close. So you just catch a cheap flight from there because finding points deals business class to Iceland is extremely hard. I've searched a lot and it's not easy. I think you essentially have to reposition to make it easier. If I were to plan it or somebody's looking to plan it, I would recommend to try to find, because you can actually find really good redemptions to Ireland pretty easily. Fly to Ireland or London or basically anywhere else you can get a nonstop flight to. I'll do that a lot. That's one of my strategies is when there's somewhere I want to go that I'm having a hard time finding a deal to, I'll go on Google Flights and search like Reykjavik, for example, or Keflavik is the name of the airport, and then just narrow it down to any nonstops. So I'll see where it flies nonstop to, and then can I find a good deal to there when I look at the shorter flights, obviously. Because sometimes you'll be surprised where there's a nonstop from and pair it up with it like that.
So a great tool that I love to use actually for that. You said you use Google Flights. I actually use flightconnections.com, which, allows you to be able to select any airport in the world. And it literally has like a spider web that explodes out of it. So you can see all of the places that have direct flights into that airport. And I typically use that to help me figure out my positioning strategy, especially for getting to the other side of the world. So when we're planning our honeymoon, which is going to be in New Zealand and Fiji, but finding out that, okay, there's a direct flight from Hong Kong to Fiji. And so found an incredible deal with that and then was able to figure out our strategy of getting from the US to Hong Kong. And it was all just using the Flight Connections tool. So I like that you mentioned that there's different ways to do that. Flight Connections has a free version. I paid lifetime on it. I think, I don't know, $150 for lifetime access. But you can use Google Flights for that, like you said, where you can just basically put in the airport and just see where else you can fly from that airport to make it super easy especially for a cash positioning flight.
And I want to know something from you if you have the same problem as I do, where when you find somewhere a good, like you said to Hong Kong, you find a good deal there. Now, do you feel like you need to plan a separate little trip to Hong Kong on your way? Because that's what I would do. I would be like, I can't just stop in the airport now. Now I need to stay there for 3 or 4 days.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So in this actual specific incident for our honeymoon, so we're actually going to have, it was supposed to be three now because of a issue with Fiji Airlines. It's going to be a 4 day stay in Hong Kong. So we actually are going to be experiencing Hong Kong for a little bit. I think traditionally anything, especially that far, I would definitely make sure we had at least 2 days, because if there was any sort of travel delays or issues or anything like that, especially because we're going to be flying in December from the States. And so if there's snow or whatever it may be that could delay, I would not position as closely as I would as if I was trying to do a flight from Virginia to New York that got into New York at 9 a.m. Then I fly out of New York at 4 p.m. or something like that. So yeah, in cases like this where I'm like, okay, I got to go to Hong Kong to then get to Fiji. Yeah, I'm absolutely going to spend some time in Hong Kong and enjoy the food and the sights. And already I'm looking for options, and I've posted in our threads online about, hey, what should we be doing? Where should we go in Hong Kong? Little known places. So I'm kind of starting to compile that list of things right now.
Yeah, that's great. It's super exciting.
So, Deanna, before we wrap this one up, where can the listeners follow you and your journey? I know I mentioned your handle at the beginning, but would love for you to circle back around to that and anything else that you have that they can follow you on.
So Instagram is my main platform. All of my content is geared towards Instagram, and that's where I'm spending most of my time there, and Threads. I'm on Threads fairly frequently, but that's where I spend most of my time. I do have a TikTok, but everything's just, my videos are geared towards Instagram, and then I'll repost some of those. I find it a bit overwhelming to put everything everywhere. So that's mostly for the people. If you're not on Instagram, or you don't want to go on Instagram and you're more on TikTok, you can follow me on there. And same thing with YouTube Shorts. I try to repurpose it so that I can post it to YouTube Shorts. But everything, like, not everything makes it everywhere. My main thing is Instagram. So if you really want to follow me and see all my tips and stuff, and I'm going to start posting everything from Singapore, Maldives, and Doha. So that's all going to be on my Instagram.
Awesome. And we'll link to all of those in the show notes. Deanna, before we wrap this up, last two questions for you. First is, I know Betsy is the one who connected us with you to get you on this show today. Who else should we have on this show for the future?
Mary on the Map. I think that she's really good with family travel. So she and I were able to connect over at Travel More Con, and we've become friends. And I think that she has a different perspective from, especially me, right? When we travel, it's business class. Me and my husband, we're looking at luxury resorts, but I know that there's a lot of people out there with kids, and there's things that need to be considered that I don't always think about, right? Timing, school, things like that. So I think that that would be a good person to talk to, especially for those people who have to take into consideration that they're traveling with children and have more tickets to buy, right?
Absolutely. That makes it more difficult. We're in the same boat as you. We're, dual income, no kids. So our travel is the same. It is very much so luxury, very much so business class, especially for the long haul flights. But obviously, we have many listeners that do have children. And I think having the good balance of both types of travel and both types of guests on the show is very beneficial. Deanna, any last thoughts that you'd like to share before we wrap this one up?
The only thing I did want to mention is for Iceland, there's a couple tips I have for saving money, because I know that it can get very expensive. And the first time I traveled, we were on a bigger budget. But one of the things that I tell people a lot is, when you're looking at hotels, look at somewhere with a kitchenette. And that's because food is incredibly expensive in Iceland. And you can save a lot of money by just going to the bonus stores and buying a little bit of food and a little bit of alcohol even, and just having that to enjoy at your hotel. And there's quite a few hotels you can find with kitchenettes. And also, because alcohol is so expensive, you can buy wine at the airport in Iceland, which is what a lot of people do. And we do every time we land in Iceland, because those bar bills get pretty high when you go out drinking in Iceland. So it's nice to have a couple at the house.
Love that. I love that reminder, because I actually forgot until you just said that, how expensive alcohol is. I mean, the bar bills are kind of ridiculous for what you would assume is just a regular bottle of even Icelandic vodka that they make there is way more expensive than you would think a regular drink should be. So love the tips. Get the kitchenette, buy some food, cook some of the smaller meals for yourself, and get wine at the airport. Thank you so much, Deanna, for all the tips today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was great.
No, you're absolutely welcome. This has been a blast unpacking everything from the nuanced city to choice hotel points, learning a little bit more about Ireland and Ireland travel on points, and of course, getting to share a little bit about the magic of Iceland. I hope this actually has been a treat for the listeners as much as it has been for myself. And for the listeners out there, if you've enjoyed this episode today, as always, please be sure to follow us on all the social channels. Make sure to like and rate and subscribe to the show. Tell your friends. Don't forget, we've got our private Facebook group where we share insider tips, points and miles deals, all sorts of things as well. And as always, we will catch all of you on the next episode. Take care, everybody.